ver la sala de videoconferencias llena, casi a full. Entonces, pues bienvenidos todos al Colegio de México. Pues hoy vamos a tener una actividad bastante especial. Tenemos el privilegio de tener aquí en esta mesa a tres grandes pensadores del Medio Oriente contemporáneo. Privilegio en muchos sentidos, en algunos casos, porque voy a hablar de derecha a izquierda. Se trata de, bueno, de mi derecha hacia, más bien de izquierda a derecha. Se trata de uno de los colegas de nosotros del Centro de Estudios Asia y África y además, pues, mi amigo y hermano de hace 20 años. Tenemos además a un amigo de México, que esta es la tercera vez que viene acá al Colegio de México, el profesor HAMID DABASHI. Y tenemos además el tercer privilegio de que nos acompañe hoy el profesor ILAN PAPPE, que es primera vez que viene a México y primera vez que viene al colegio, por lo tanto, creo que vamos a tener una mesa bastante activa. Esperamos también la participación del público hoy en la sesión de preguntas y respuestas. Entonces, voy a presentar brevemente a cada uno de los ponentes. Pues el orden va a ser el profesor ILAN PAPPE, el profesor HAMID DABASHI y el profesor Luis Mesa, estoy fatal.
Eso que hace 20 años no.
Y creo que para que sea mucho más dinámica la mesa, voy primero a leer las semblanzas curriculares de los tres participantes y abrimos entonces la sesión. I'll be switching from Spanish into English in order to chair this roundtable today. I was talking about that it's a privilege for us in Colmex and for me especially to have you here today. And this is also a privilege to have all this audience here in Colmex, which is not a usual thing because Colmex students population is very small. So to have a full audience here, it's really a very happy thing. Entonces, bueno, voy a presentar a cada uno de ellos y so I will introduce you all first and then I will open the round table. En primer lugar, a la extrema derecha tenemos al profesor ILAN PAPPE de la Universidad de Exeter. El profesor ILAN PAPPE es un crítico del sionismo, activista político, revisionista de la historia moderna del Estado de Israel y profesor de historia. ILAN PAPPE se ha posicionado como defensor de la creación de un Estado único y secular en el territorio histórico de Palestina. Nacido en Haifa, Israel, en 1954, cursó la licenciatura en Relaciones Internacionales e Historia en la Universidad Hebrea de Jerusalén y estudios de posgrado en Ciencia Política en la Universidad de Oxford. Sus líneas de investigación se enfocan en la modernidad en el Medio Oriente, particularmente en Israel y Palestina, el multiculturalismo, el análisis crítico del discurso y el binomio poder-conocimiento. Fue miembro fundador y director del Instituto Académico para la Paz en Givat Haviva, en Israel, entre 1992 y el año 2000, así como fundador de la coalición Hadash, Frente Democrático para la Paz y la Igualdad. Al mismo tiempo, formó parte del Consejo del Instituto para Estudios Palestinos, Emil Tuma, y fue profesor de la Universidad de Haifa en los departamentos de Ciencia Política e Historia del Medio Oriente. Actualmente imparte clases en la Universidad de Exeter en el Reino Unido, es miembro del Instituto de Estudios Árabes e Islámicos y colaborador activo del Grupo de Estudios de Humanidades en el Medio Oriente de dicha universidad. Entre sus últimas publicaciones destacan La prisión más grande del mundo, Historia de la ocupación de Palestina, La idea de Israel y El Medio Oriente moderno, una historia sociocultural. Sin embargo, es autor y colaborador de decenas de libros y de artículos. El segundo participante en la mesa redonda de hoy es el profesor HAMID DABASHI de la Universidad de Columbia. Nacido en Ahabaz, Irán, en 1951, HAMID DABASHI es una de las figuras más notables en estudios iraníes a nivel global. Profesor comprometido con la causa palestina, intelectual orgánico, miembro fundador del Centro de Estudios Palestinos de la Universidad de Columbia y del Instituto de Literatura Comparada y Sociedad de la misma institución. Tiene entre sus principales líneas de investigación el Islam moderno y medieval, literatura comparada, arte y filosofía y cinematografía mundial. Tras concluir su educación superior en Teherán, se trasladó a los Estados Unidos, lugar donde obtendría el doctorado dual en Sociología de la Cultura y Estudios Islámicos por la Universidad de Pensilvania, seguido de una beca postdoctoral en la Universidad de Harvard. Además de ser autor de más de 20 libros, tales como Irán, un pueblo interrumpido, Teología del descontento, verdad y narrativa, e Irán sin fronteras, es un destacado colaborador del periódico Al Jazeera y copartícipe de revistas de divulgación. Ha publicado cientos de ensayos, artículos, reseñas y es precursor de muestras fílmicas que pretenden visibilizar la relación entre el arte y la política. Sueños de una nación es tan solo un ejemplo de ese esfuerzo. Destaca sin duda como uno de los investigadores contemporáneos más sobresalientes y críticos, hecho que le otorgó el estatus de profesor Jacob Kevorkian de Estudios iraníes y de Literatura Comparada de la Universidad de Columbia. Actualmente vive en Nueva York, donde comparte su vida con su esposa Golbashi y su hija Chelgis y su hijo Golchin, que están aquí hoy. Más cercano a mí, el profesor Luis Mesa del Monte, estoy seguro que la gran mayoría de los que están aquí lo conoce bastante personalmente. Es profesor del Centro de Estudios de Asia y África del Colegio de México, doctor en Estudios de Asia y África con especialidad en Medio Oriente también por esta misma institución y maestro en Historia Contemporánea por la Universidad de La Habana y en Estudios Afroasiáticos con especialización en África del Norte y Medio Oriente por el mismo CEA, el Colegio de México. Adicionalmente, tiene 2 diplomas en Resolución de Conflictos y Paz y Seguridad por la Universidad de Uppsala, Suecia. Sus líneas de investigación son Relaciones Internacionales, Seguridad, estaba escrito Suiza, me consta. Relaciones Internacionales, Seguridad y Conflicto, en Medio Oriente, Seguridad Humana y Reforma del Sector de Seguridad e Islam en América y en específico el caso particular de Cuba. Ha publicado numerosos artículos sobre estos temas en revistas académicas de Argentina, Canadá, Colombia, Cuba, México, España, Turquía, Estados Unidos y Venezuela. 2 de sus más recientes publicaciones que ha coordinado son Las Relaciones Exteriores de Siria, el Colegio de México 2013, El pueblo quiere que caiga el régimen, protestas sociales y conflictos en África del Norte y Medio Oriente, el Colegio de México 2012. Además de estos 2 libros coordinados, pues tiene otro libro de autor, y pues es uno de los colaboradores más activos de la revista Siempre con un artículo sobre Medio Oriente cada 15 días, que además posteamos nosotros en la página de el perfil del CEA en Facebook. Entonces, por ahí lo pueden encontrar todos. Pertenece al Sistema Nacional de Investigadores, nivel 3, y es uno de los más queridos profesores del Colegio de México, sin duda, y me consta. Entonces, I will open the round table right now, and I will pass the microphone to Dr. Pappe.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here. I want to congratulate you all for this very important session that we are having, and it's been a great pleasure to be here, and it's a great honor to share the platform with such distinguished scholars, and I want to thank especially the college for hosting us today and for you for attending this session. I always like to hear my CV in Spanish. It sounds much more glorious than in English. It's almost like something that I will hope to be able to repeat one day myself. We are asked today to answer an impossible question: what's next for Palestine? And of course, there is a clear distinction between what we would like to see will happen next in Palestine and Israel, and what we think is going to happen. And unfortunately, for many of us, what we would like to see and what we think is going to happen is not only not the same, it's probably 2 opposites of the same reality. Let me try and clarify at least some of the issues, just to begin this roundtable, some of the issues which I would at least like to discuss with my colleagues and with you when we pose the question of what's next to Palestine. And I thought the best way of doing it is to talk about 3 circles: the local one, the regional one, and the international one. So let's start with the local one. In the local arena, in the space between the river Jordan and the Mediterranean, with the risk of prophesizing, one has a strong feeling that what you see today is what you're going to see in the next few years. If you want to give it a more dynamic dimension, you can say it will be much of the same, but far worse. And this is very clear to anyone who lives there, anyone who visits the place for a long time and observes the reality. It is clear that the Israeli political system is going more and more to the right, less and less interested in democratic values, and has a very solid electoral support for interpreting Zionism as an ideology that allows it to use any means possible to complete the settler colonialist project of Zionism between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean. And that project, if I would summarize it in one sentence, is to have as much of Palestine as possible with as few Palestinians in it as possible. And although previous Israeli political elites were very sophisticated about how to achieve it, maybe some even had some moral issues with their own vision, this particular political elite, with its intellectual support, believes it has a window of opportunity to complete the full Judaization of Palestine between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean, and in many ways exposes Israel today as a racist state, an ethnic racist state that has very little interest in respecting international law, civil rights, or human rights of anyone who does not belong to the Israeli state and its political body. On the Palestinian side, there is still not enough realization that this is the project. This is why we can still hear a lot of Palestinians still thinking that a two-state solution is a possible solution, that they're still hoping that there are some internal dynamics within the Israeli Jewish society that will bring to power political forces that will make it possible to find a pragmatic solution based on the two nation states. I think many of them already know now that this is not going to happen. That this whole idea that there is a very dynamic political body within the Jewish society that can bring to the fore a different kind of political elite, a different kind of strategy, if you want, in local terms, a peace camp, bring the peace camp to power. I think this is an illusion. This is not going to happen. There is no potential within the Israeli Jewish society in the near future for such a political force to gain enough power to be able to divert the Israeli policy towards this kind of solution, whether it's a good one or a bad one, doesn't matter, just my own analysis of this. So locally, what we're going to see is a balance of power, which will allow Israel to continue its policies. And what is very difficult to predict, and I'm not going to predict, is how will it be resisted locally. There are signs for popular resistance. There are signs for a younger generation of Palestinians trying to suggest even new political formations in order to give a new meaning to the project of the liberation of Palestine that adapts to the 21st century. I would say even moving a little bit from the national discourse or nationalist discourse into the discourse of human rights and civil rights. This is a very slow process. This is a very slow process, and I think that's one of the reasons we find it difficult to measure its impact. But it's happening. It's definitely happening. And they also have some colleagues and comrades on the Jewish side among the younger generation. So if you want to be hopeful, you can say that in the long term, there is an undercurrent of politics, of idea of politics, that involves moral justice, that involves truth to power to truth. And the same kind of values that have propelled and motivated in many ways the 2008 kind of reaction to the financial crisis we've seen not only in Palestine but all over the world. So there is this gap between a very powerful political elite, military elite, that until now nobody succeeds in challenging, and an undercurrent of a civil society that is too weak and too premature in many ways for us to be able to say how successful and how powerful it would be. Regionally, I don't have to tell you that the region around Palestine is burning in many ways. As I used to say to my Israeli friends, the fact that you occupy the best cabin on the Titanic doesn't mean that you are not on the Titanic. And Israel is on the Titanic, which is called the Middle East, but they don't realize it because they really have the best deck, and they don't see what's going on around them. It will spill over into Israel, there's no doubt about it. The undercurrents that tear the Arab world, that challenge the political structures that the colonialist powers have built after the First World War, and nobody here can really predict where it's going to go to. I'm not going to skip Palestine and Israel. The area is too small and too compact for such an ability to create an island that would detach you from what's going on around you. Regionally, what we're going to see, and this is part of the same story, is our political elites that are going to play according to the tune of the Israeli government and American policy. More and more Arab regimes would go this way, there's very little doubt about it. And civil society that more and more rejects this kind of policies. Again, I cannot know how it will implode, but the gap between what Palestine means to the political elites today in the Arab world and the Middle East, and what Palestine means to growing sections within the civil society, this gap is going to be very influential in determining how the region itself is going both to react to the reality in Israel and Palestine and be influenced by the reality in Israel and Palestine. And let me finish just with the international one. I don't want to take too much time. The international arena sees a similar gap between a civil society, a global civil society, that knows too much about Israel and Palestine, has too much of a moral backbone not to side with the Palestinian struggle, not to condemn, and is condemning, the political elites' stances, attitudes, and policies towards Palestine. And political elites, for various reasons, and I don't have time to go into it, there are different reasons why political elites in Europe are pro-Israelis, why they are in the United States or in Latin America, but whatever reasons they are, this is another place where the gap between what democratically huge number of people would like their politicians and diplomats to do on Palestine on the one hand, and what the governments is doing and what the main media is reporting, this gap is going to grow in the next a few years. And because, if you want to connect the three circles together, because the reality on the ground locally becomes so clear that Israel is an apartheid ethnic state, and there's no more room for the charade of democracy, all these oxymorons of a Jewish democratic state. This is not working anymore, even not with young Jews in the United States. It doesn't work anymore because of this gap, because you can see the reality. A lot of people who found ways of ignoring the reality or reconciling their identity politics or their other interests with a reality they didn't want to see, because this will become impossible. I think the pressure that is already manifested in the boycott and divestment and sanction movement, the BDS movement, this pressure will grow, will increase, and Israel will become a pariah state, very much like apartheid South Africa was. And I just would end by reminding us, and with this I will end, that it took 21 years before the first act of a civil society against apartheid South Africa took place in Dublin, and the first decision by a government to impose sanctions on South Africa. 21 years it took. It began in Dublin, in Ireland, the first brave people who decided to boycott South African goods, and it took another 20 years before the first government in the world was willing to follow the civil society action. And I think this is where my hope lies into, that it depends on how we understand politics, how we understand the relationship between elite politics and the power of people and civil society. This will impact Palestine. And the other way around, if Palestine gets into a different phase, it impacts the relationship between political elites and society elsewhere. Thank you. Sorry.
Le cedo la palabra al doctor HAMID DABASHI a continuación.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Professor Garcia. Just like Ilan, I also love to hear my CV in Spanish. It sounds like you're singing in a bathroom. Sounds so. And also all my other colleagues here in El Colegio de Mexico. I was just sharing with your distinguished Vice President the history of your college has to do with one of towering Mexican intellectuals, Alfonso Reyes, establishing this institution to welcome expatriate scholars and intellectuals from Franco, Spain. You should get ready for perhaps another round of them coming from the north, from Trump's America, which is not any better. The advantage of having the privilege of coming after Ilan is that he lays a very solid foundation on which one can now speculate. So if you will hear me a little bit more optimistic, it's not that I disagree, I completely agree, but perhaps has to do with my sign of being born a Gemini. What is your sign?
A Scorpion.
Scorpion, you see?
You're a known pessimist.
Gemini, as you know, are two-sided. So if Ilan was not here, you would hear me talk like Ilan, but not Ilan here, I'm a thing. Now, the point is none of us is here in prognostication. Who knows what happens next? We should have a realistic assessment of what it is happening that Ilan talked about. And then based on that realistic assessment, to speculate in a critical, hopeful way what might happen as we move forward. Now, when we say realistic, there are lots of historical misperceptions about Palestinian resistance. You hear Palestinian resistance, you hear terrorism, you hear throwing kids. This is what you hear about Palestinians, which is farthest from truth. The foundation of Palestinian resistance are Palestinian people and their land, as Ilan says. The whole project of Zionism was more land from Palestine with less people of Palestinians. The fact that today, 100 years after Balfour Declaration, we still talk about Palestine, Palestinians, that even in the course of my own academic life, when I joined Columbia in late 1980s, people used to say, Palestine. It's Palestinian. That when we did the Palestinian Film Festival, in early 2000, and huge lines of people showed up to watch Palestinian films, then the question is a reassessment of what has happened historically, which begins with the actual Palestinian people on the land, namely those who have continued to sustain their heritage as Palestinians, their history, their culture, their language, their civil society, their art, their literature, etc. That's the basic things. The second is, of course, is demography. And demography is predicated, as you know, not on hate, but on love. And anytime, I recently had a conversation with a Palestinian colleague who is the father of 3 magnificent children. I said, that's the path to victory. Love-making, making more children. He said, you sound like my grandfather. This is what he told us 2 generations ago. So demography and land, these are the 2 issues as the foundation of Palestinian resistance. Beyond that, you have to go to aesthetic, poetic manifestations of these facts. You have to look at Palestinian literature, Palestinian art, Palestinian cinema, Palestinian poetry. These are manifestations of a reality that when we only go to the political dimension of it, we have compromised it. And I also make a distinction between politics and proto-state manifestations of Palestinian representation. We are in the presence of distinguished ambassador of Palestine, so I must be circumspect by saying the worst aspect of Palestinian resistance is proto-state manifestations. From Fatah to Jabha Sha'biyya. I grew up as a Jabha Sha'biyya person, but even any political manifestation in terms of organized politics, to Hamas, to Haraka Islamiyya, etc. These are the least effective, more vulnerable, more susceptible to political mistakes. And as a result, the question of Palestinian resistance should never be judged on the manifestations of what did Hamas do, what is Khalid Mash'al doing, or what is Mahmoud Abbas doing. To the degree that they are the democratic representations, they need to be considered. But the fact is, Palestinians are a nation without a state. This is the single most important thing that I want to say. That we need to look at the history of Palestinian resistance as a process by which a people who have recognized historically, culturally, linguistically, as Palestinians, continuing to build themselves as Palestinians. Today, the single most important, as Ilan said, aspect of Palestinian resistance is the BDS movement. BDS movement is a civil rights movement. Has nothing to do with that. It was not initiated by any state apparatus, but initiated by Palestinian civil society and their Israeli supporters and international community. Now, here is when we can begin to speculate what is going to happen in future by looking at the active transformation of Palestinian national liberation movement into a civil rights movement. Here we are combined, whether we are talking about 1948 or 67, or Palestinians in refugee camps, or Palestinians in the diaspora all over the world. Here, through the BDS movement, we have the formation of a semblance of a transnational public sphere. Okay, this is what I borrow from Habermas, but give it a political kind of a kick. Namely, you have a public sphere in which, whether you're a Palestinian in 1948, and I've told Ilan, I consider Ilan, PAPPE himself, a Palestinian of 1948. His parents emigrated to Palestine, where he was born. Where we're talking about Palestinians of 48 or 67 or in the refugee camps or in the diaspora, they are part and parcel of an active formation of a transnational public sphere on which the idea of Palestine as a nation, I make a clear distinction between nation as a theoretical proposition and nationalism as a state ideology. So if we are witness through BDS and through other manifestation, the active formation of transformation of Palestinian national liberation movement into a civil rights movement. This civil rights movement is as much applicable to Palestinians within the boundaries of 48 Israel, outside that boundary into the occupied territories of after 67, in the refugee camps, etc., etc. So the political fragmentation over the last 100 years of Palestinians into various things, various sites, has actually helped in the formation of a sculpted public sphere, a real public sphere, that Palestinians here in Mexico City have a slightly different take than Palestinians who live in Jordan, or Palestinians who live in Haifa, or Palestinians who live somewhere else. If this transformation of national liberation into civil rights movement is something that indeed we are witnessing. And then we have models of civil rights movement, particularly in the United States. Because if you begin with the bus boycott of Rosa Parks, okay, late 94, all the way to the period that Martin Luther King sat with President Johnson to draft the question of Civil Rights Act, this is the time period that we have to take into consideration. When we are asked to speculate about future, the question is what time frame? Are we talking about, okay, this happened in 2000, and the father happened this, or what the French school called longue durée? There is a different time frame, as Ilan just said about the South African case. We have to open up the frame, have an active imagination of the future possibilities. Now, in that future possibility, the question is 6 million, 7 million, I don't want to haggle numbers, of those who today consider themselves Israelis. They need to have, within an active imagination, a way of thinking themselves in a context that we hope to have happened. We used to call this one-state solution. Now, in my later life, I'm now come to conclusion that I was correct in my teens. I'm an anarchist. I don't believe in state. Not that I don't realize state is a monopoly of violence, right? My poor colleagues, Allah, etc., have been trying to, through this labyrinth of traffic in Mexico City, and then, 3 soldiers with machine guns, they can interrupt the whole thing. That's a state monopoly of violence. So I am not naive to say we disregard the state. You suffer 3 hours of traffic because they are checked. But my proposal is for us to begin actively to theorize the nation away, decoupled from the nation-state. There are many of you who may have voted for this president, but the totality of the claim of the Mexican state to Mexican people as a nation is a false delusion. It doesn't exist. It's as much delusional right now in the United States that Trump thinks that this racist, xenophobic, Islamophobic, anti-Semitic is actually his constituency, which is false, which is a misreading of what has happened in the last presidential election. If we decouple the operation of the state and the reality of the formation of the nation, here I think we need actively to bring those who call themselves, for right reasons or wrong reasons, Israelis, into the domain of the public sphere, for them to realize that the securitization of the state of Israel is not just for Palestinians, it is also for Israelis. Israelis are as much subject to this security, cyber control, securitization of a state as Palestinians are. And that itself, namely the securitization of the state apparatus, the security state, is a global phenomenon. Is as much operative in Israel as it is in Saudi Arabia, as it is in Pakistan, as it is in the United States. And the best site of detection of that securitization of a state is, of course, the airport. We have to disregard what happens. We are rushing out of the airport in order to get into the comfort of the public sphere. But airport, whether it is Tel Aviv or Doha or Mexico City, wherever it is, that is where the reality of the fragmentation and vulnerability of our digitized humanity, that no longer my freaking passport has to look like me, I have to look like my passport in order to pass this transformation. Agamben's revolutionary theorization of this and the transformation of society into fragments of Auschwitz, the book that you should read, Agamben, is not just about Israel, is also about Israel, but it's also about a more universal phenomenon. Now, my point is this: if a state is developing its own particular power of digitization of humanity, and in order to survive, as you see in the aftermath of the Arab revolutions, the counter-revolutionary forces came together, created a monstrosity called Islamic State. Islamic State was at the service of every reactionary regime on planet Earth, and called itself Islamic State. So it is imperative for us to realize that the Jewish state is a replica of Islamic Republic. Islamic Republic is a replica of Christian Empire. Christian Empire is a replica of Hindu fundamentalism. Hindu fundamentalism is a replica of Buddhist nationalism. These are all alike. Going to the most common, vulnerable denominators of humans. Not every morning, Ilan and I get up and say, oh, okay, now what do I do as a Jew or as a Muslim? You know, there are other things that we are, including, happily, Jew or a Muslim. So this multifaceted fact of our living, that we are not irreducible to where, how we appeared as a wonderful sign in our parents' eyes. We had no choice. Did you have a choice? No, I didn't do that. I'm happy they were happy. They made multiple children. But the question is beyond the factual evidence of the cosmopolitan reality of our truth, which is being compromised by securitization of the state, by the cyberspace modulation of the state. If, as a result, we separate the idea of nation and a state, if we begin to cultivate the formation of Palestinian resistance as a national phenomenon, not nationalistic phenomenon, that is much larger than its fragmented manifestation in Fatah or Palestinian Authority or any state that may come, any state whatsoever, a state with a hammer and sickle, okay, does not represent, because the complexity and diversity and historical organicity of the nation is a living organism. Whereas a state, as the word says, which is different from the Arabic word dawla, which comes from dawala, which means changing, a state means state, right there. You know, the monolith that historically we have known. If we separate, this is a way to bring together the reality between the river and the sea, as we say, of 10, 12, 14 million human beings, certainly as a Jewish homeland. Here, Palestinians have to come to terms, yes, they had nothing to do with the persecution of Jews for hundreds of years in the European context, from the pogroms to the Holocaust. But acknowledgement of the Jewish suffering is coterminous with acknowledgement of the Palestinian suffering. And as a result, a condition upon which fertile ground a commission or an understanding or a conversation of truth and reconciliation, what happened and how do we reconcile it, is a precondition of a condition that the nation, you want to call it bilingual nation or a binational nation, that comprises of these two lived experiences of suffering can come together in order to resist the formation of a state, securitization of a state that will rule and digitize both people identically. Again, this is not what I think is going to happen. This is what I hope will happen, but not entirely wishful thinking, predicated on the factual evidence of what we really have on the state. Thank you.
Cedemos la palabra al doctor Mesa.
Thank you very much. It is a great privilege for me to be here this morning. You can imagine today I'm getting older, fortunately, I must say. Today is my birthday, so sharing this panel with this couple of brilliant professors recognized all over the world as Professor PAPPE is and DABASHI is something that I really appreciate, and I take it as a present.
Happy birthday.
Thanks a lot. I would like to thank UNAM and the authorities in el Colegio de México for making this panel possible. But especially Dr. Moises Garduño, that has been working a lot in order to promote these studies in the UNAM. And I was talking the other day about the need of cooperation between the different Mexican institutions and the obstacles, stupid obstacles, I repeat it again, in order to go forward with the need of getting deep into thinking and knowledge. And maybe you are the best, one of the best, one of the best, or another example of cooperation between institutions, because we are so happy that you studied with us here and you graduated from our program, and now you're, like you said, it's a kind of shining, rising star.
Rising star.
In the middle of an eclipse. And you know me, many of you know me perfectly well. You know that I hate to read papers. But taking into consideration my objective conditions, sounds like Marxist-Leninist approach, and the challenges that I have today with my health and so on, I decided to write some lines about one of the daily obsessions that we share all over the world. I'm not talking about Palestine, I'm talking about the Trump administration. So this is a paper on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and the Trump administration. And sorry for reading, I never do that, but I must do that today. I said, any future transformation of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict seems to be linked to the evolution of a huge diversity of factors as the dynamics of occupation and resistance, the support of the international community, and a desirable U.S. engagement. After many decades of cyclical crisis, the stagnation of the process, of the peace process, is evident today, and there is not much space for optimism. Both parts accuse each other of the failure in the negotiations, and the level of disbelief between them is so high. So there is a need to create a sense of possibility through bilateral confidence building measures helped by solid mediation efforts. That's what I learned in Uppsala, that you were there. During decades, the very strong and strategic bilateral relations between the United States and Israel has been a decisive factor of the Israeli reality and its policy in the region. Nevertheless, there are also been moments of frictions between Washington and Tel Aviv. More recently, the Obama administration had many contradictions in the relation with Israel, not only as consequence of the evident lack of empathy and recriminations between President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu, but also due to policy disagreements on the Israeli settlements in occupied lands, the two-state solution formula, the Iran nuclear deal, and other bilateral issues. Obama promoted the peacemaking idea, pushing for the establishment of a Palestinian state through a two-state solution formula, and strongly demanding the freezing of settlement construction in occupied territories. But he had to face the hard rightist tendency of the position of the Netanyahu government since 2009. Anyway, in practical terms, Obama administration was not able to move far away from the rhetorical shifts and supported Israel in the UN system, avoiding his international condemnation as results, for example, of his attacks on Gaza Strip in different occasions. Furthermore, it boosted military aid to Israel to unprecedented levels. When both parts signed a new 10-year memorandum of understanding, rising up the level of military aid to $3.8 billion. In that way, Washington kept guaranteeing Israel's qualitative military edge in the Middle East region. The administration abstention to the UN Security Council Resolution 2334, December of last year, that considered all Israeli settlements on Palestinian territory occupied since 1967, including East Jerusalem, with no legal validity, was immediately condemned by Netanyahu office as shameful, and expressed Israel's desire in working more closely with the next US President, Donald Trump. During the presidential campaign, Trump initially said that he planned to be sort of a neutral guy in Israeli-Palestinian peace negotiation. But in a short period of time, he started to define a more pro-Israeli stand. Criticizing Obama's policies, he assured that, I quote, "When I become president, the days of treating Israel like a second-class citizen will end on day one," end of the quote. He promised to move the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and after the already mentioned U.S. abstention of the Resolution 2334, suggested that Israel should stay strong and await his coming to office. Less than a month after his arrival to the White House, Trump received Prime Minister Netanyahu, indicating that Obama's harsh times have passed away and that a new period of warmer relations was starting. Since that very first moment, it seems that the administration decided not to push necessarily for a two-state solution in the conflict, as was supported by previous U.S. governments. Trump said, and quote him again, "I'm looking at two-state and one state, and I like the one that both parties like. It doesn't matter to me. Do what you can." David Friedman was proposed by Trump as the new ambassador to Israel, as expected by many. Friedman has no diplomatic experience, what for? But is a longtime friend of Trump and worked for him as a bankruptcy lawyer. In addition to investing in Israeli settlements, Friedman was in favor of moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, so his appointment was interpreted as a clear pro-Israeli stand of the new administration. Trump also delegated the peace process portfolio to his son-in-law and most trusted advisor, Jared Kushner, whose family has important investments in Israel. He started to send Kushner, along with Jason Greenblatt, a real estate lawyer named by Trump as a special envoy for international negotiations, to talk with Palestinian and Israeli authorities in order to discuss prospects for resuming the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. This kind of shuttle diplomacy could be affected by the limited experience in foreign policy and no expertise on the historical Israeli-Palestinian conflict of the Kushner-Friedman-Greenblatt trio. And this is not jazz, unfortunately. As Professor Gregory Goss III has said, the big question about the Trump administration in the Middle East is if it will be competent enough to avoid major problems and achieve short-term goals. Palestinians perceive that these designated interlocutors with close ties to Israel will not be able to mediate fairly in the conflict. The Palestinians believe that Israel is blocking any peace process while it builds settlements on Palestinian land, and that Israel will negotiate only if Washington applies pressure. Last May was an important month for Trump's involvement in the Middle East and into the Israeli-Palestinian conflict when he met Abbas in Washington, President Abbas, in Washington, D.C., declaring that there was a good chance to create peace between Israel and the Palestinians. And, I'll quote him again, "It is something that I think is frankly not as difficult as people have thought over the years." Come to Trump, baby. Days later, during his first trip abroad as U.S. president that started in Saudi Arabia, he had personal dialogues with Netanyahu in Israel and Abbas again in Bethlehem. Trump neither moved the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, as some Israeli officials hoped he would do. He hasn't done it until today. Nor pressed Israel to curb settlement construction in the West Bank in public, as Palestinians hoped. It is very probable that during his exchanges with the Saudis and the signing of different agreements on fighting terrorism, huge economic deals, and military sales for $110 billion, Trump understood that moving the embassy to Jerusalem could generate hard protests all over the Middle East and the Islamic world. So he decided to freeze his intention, at least for now. It is also possible that Trump would be more attracted to the idea of compromising other regional actors in the negotiation process, such as Saudi Arabia, who is developing new channels of communication with Israel, including discreet intelligence and some sales. It is being said that during his trip to the Middle East, Trump proposed developing a broad coalition of Middle Eastern nations, including Israel, to push back on Iran's influence.
Why you look at me?
Your passport. Your digitized passport.
They have another passport with a little bit different from yours, but anyway. To push back on Iran's influence, while working to develop a parallel plan for peace between Israel and Palestinians. Maybe some officials in the American administration are thinking of recovering the main ideas of the Arab Peace Initiative, presented by Saudi Arabia in 2002. According to that plan, the Arab states will recognize Israel in return of a Palestinian state with its capital in East Jerusalem and the pre-1967 war borders. Still today, Israel is cautious, let us say, about the level of pressure they could receive from the Arab camp and what would be the final level of concessions to the Palestinians in that kind of deal. At the same time, the Palestinians are also suspicious of the Arab countries, as in many previous occasions, because they could engage in a process prioritizing their own interests instead of the Palestinian cause, pressuring the Palestinian camp to make important concessions and affecting its levels of sovereignty and independence. The leader of the Palestinian National Authority must also take into consideration that some elements on which they could agree could also receive strong criticism from the Palestinian civil society and the Islamic Palestinian movements as well. Moreover, the general idea of the plan is full of particular uncertainties and problems that make it almost impossible to imagine a fair deal in the near future. Just think, for example, about the historical things. How will be shaped the new Palestinian state? What about border controls and security management? The status of East Jerusalem, Israeli settlement, Palestinian refugees, agricultural and water resources, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. Palestinian civil society sounds increasingly pessimistic about the prospects of the two-state solution facing the stagnation of the peace process. Secretary General of the PLO Executive Committee, Saeb Erekat, has insisted that the final agreement must include a two-state solution based on the pre-1967 borders, delegitimizing all the settlements, including East Jerusalem, and enforcing the international law. He has criticized Trump administration for his silence on the increase in Israel's settlement building in the West Bank, a fact that helps the Israelis to abandon the two-state solution and work towards a one state. In his word, that will be I quote him, a two governments reality in which one of those governments imposes an apartheid regime, end of the quote. But at the same time, Erekat has expressed a certain degree of flexibility about the one-state option when he declared, quote him, the only alternative to two sovereign and democratic states of the 1967 borders is one single, secular and democratic state with equal rights for everyone. End of the quote. The prospects for success for Trump's peace process initiative, the so-called the ultimate deal and the toughest deal in the world, as he called it, does not seem greater today than they were in previous times. It is difficult to find out new elements or a new window of opportunity, again for my Swedish professors, to reach for a final solution of the conflict. In fact, the same Netanyahu told the new French President Emmanuel Macron in July that it will be complicated to move quickly with the American plan. The almost everyday internal problems of the Trump administration, the chaotic inner cycle of power with periodical firing of close advisors, his problematic rhetoric and Twitter policy that must be amended in many cases by Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and the Secretary of Defense John Mattis, his contradictions between declarations and practice that results in an incongruent foreign policy, his increasing differences with his own Republican Party, his high controversies with the press, the fake press, and the logical doubts about his continuity in the US presidency for a long time, explain the growing levels of skepticism of the international community, the Palestinians, and even the Israelis. But failing to fill numerous senior positions in the Department of State and systematically excluding career foreign service officers from decision-making, the Trump administration does not help to build a strong legitimacy as mediator. All the consultations and decisions are taken at the very top of the power structure. There is not much detailed information about the contents of the proposals and discussions with the Israeli and Palestinians. Some experts speculate that we may be living the same old story, while others think that Trump's plan could actually work and that it is a correct strategy not to make so many relations before you know what you can achieve and when you can achieve it. Then I ask, are we witnessing a mixture of new, wise, non-previously imagined ideas with a more business-efficient decision-making process? It is difficult to imagine that this is the reality of today. But the way Ramallah leadership assesses that there are no concrete plans by the administration to launch negotiations, except to emphasize how important it is to the president. President Abbas has assured that he has met with Trump in voice about 20 times since he assumed the presidency in Washington. But, in words of Abbas, we cannot understand how they are conducting themselves with us. End of the quoting. In a conversation with congressional aides, which was supposed to be off the record, but was recorded and leaked to the press on August the 1st, Kushner, one of the main guys participating in this, expressed hesitancy at the United States' ability to broker a peace deal between Israel and the Palestinians. He said, I quote Kushner, "So what do we offer that is unique? I don't know. I am sure that everyone has tried this, has been unique in some ways. And we are trying to work with the parties very quietly to see if there is a solution. And there may be no solution." That's the end of the quote. With all these elements, it is hard to tell that the Trump administration will be able to develop an unbiased and successful mediation strategy. It is highly probable and unfortunate that we will live with a prolongation of the conflict during years to come. But history is full of unpredictable surprises, for good or worse, or for good or for worse. Let us hope that the legitimate right of the Palestinian people to a free and independent Palestine will take shape in an appropriate manner, ending years of Israeli occupation. If peace and coexistence could prevail, if the conflict as we know it today is transformed, many creative ideas could guarantee socio-economic development and political rights to both actors. Thank you very much.
Well, now that the room is a little bit more full than before, I want to appreciate very much the three of our participants, and I also want to thank several people that are here. So before opening the question and answer round, first of all, again, thank you to our three speakers today. Thank you very much to Professor Moisés Garduño, who actually is the mind behind the 3 days of events. So there were 2 days before in UNAM, Monday and Tuesday, and this one too. So thank you very much to Moisés and to UNAM for this. Thank you also to the authorities of Colmex, of colleagues, many friends that I am looking here from from this part of the room and the students. And now, well, I will open the session of question and answers. There was one over here first, and then Shadi.
Es para mí un día de mucha gratitud y estoy muy contento de estar aquí porque yo soy egresado de la maestría de demografía de esta institución y nunca me imaginé que en algún momento iba a hablar de demografía sobre la cuestión palestina y aquí estoy para hacer algunas referencias. La primera vez me interesé en la cuestión palestina, referida al asunto demográfico, fue hace como 2 años y medio que vi en las noticias que el senador Kerry de Estados Unidos había hablado de la bomba demográfica. La bomba demográfica. Que era una profesora de la UNAM.
Pasó así.
Bueno, ahorita no lo interrumpo. Ya me estuve buscando, escribimos un artículo en la revista de Relaciones Internacionales que se llama así precisamente la cuestión demográfica en el conflicto palestino-israelí, en la ocupación palestina por Israel. Entonces, en este ensayo se plantea la cuestión demográfica. Lo que está ocurriendo, y esto hay que darlo como referencia, desde la fundación del Estado de Israel en 1948, Israel ya tenía en su escritorio toda una política demográfica muy bien elaborada. Desde la ocupación misma de Palestina por Israel ya venía muy bien planteada la cuestión demográfica, cuya parte fundamental siempre fue el traer población judía, porque en ese momento no existía el Estado de Israel, población judía a Israel para formar el Estado de Israel. Entonces, siempre Israel tuvo una política demográfica muy bien pensada, muy bien planteada, y esa política demográfica finalmente termina en la ocupación brutal de Palestina por parte de Israel, ¿verdad? Entonces, la cuestión de la bomba demográfica se refiere a que iba a estallar una bomba demográfica, es decir, que los palestinos traían un crecimiento demográfico muy grande, muy superior al de Israel. Me puse a revisar con la profesora Musalem los datos y resulta que la población de Israel es muy superior a la población de Palestina. Y llevado esto a una proyección demográfica de Naciones Unidas hasta el 2030, todavía en el 2030 Israel supera a la población palestina con 3 millones de habitantes. Entonces, la famosa bomba demográfica no explotó. Y así le llamó un funcionario de alto nivel israelí que escribió un ensayo y dijo: la bomba demográfica se cebó. O sea, ya no explotó la bomba demográfica.
Muchas gracias.
Eso.
¿Sí? Shadi, segunda pregunta. Les pido de favor que tratemos de hacer preguntas lo más concisas posibles para poder aprovechar bien el tiempo.
I have a request. Maybe if you can tell us more about the BDS movement. How do you evaluate it right now? Because you both mentioned it, Hamid and Ilan, as our only hope right now. I mean, you were both I think, too kind when you spoke about the official Palestinian politics today. I think it's, whether it's the work of the Palestinian Authority, the official Palestinian parties, it's a disaster. You know, they are arresting people, they are killing people, they are censoring journalism, and etc. What the BDS, how do you see it today? How can it be better? And also for Luis, how do you see BDS, you know, boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign here in Latin America, Mexico, and possibly here in the COLEGIO? That's all.
Okay, let me start by maybe saying something, the background for the BDS, although I don't know how much people know, but I apologize if I repeat some known facts. It's, as Hamid said, it's a civil rights movement that emerged around 2005 by Palestinian NGOs, both in the West Bank, in the Gaza Strip, inside Israel, Palestinian NGOs around the world, Palestinian committees with Palestine solidarity committees around the world. The model was obviously the solidarity movement with the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. And it took some time to gel as a movement, but very soon after its, if you want, official announcement in 2005, it was very clear on three issues. The idea was that you ask people to join a civil rights movement for boycotting official Israeli institution, official Israeli policies in the academia, in the cultural arena, in economics, and in politics, in order to protect three basic Palestinian rights. The rights of the Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip not to live under the threat of military occupation, strangulation, and oppression. The right of the Palestinians inside Israel to live equally and not to be under an apartheid system that discriminates against them in all walks of life, and the right of the Palestinian refugees to return to their homeland and homes. So these were the three rights that were defined by the BDS movement as human rights, as civil rights protected by international law and by international understanding what human rights are. And the idea was not to offer a program that would replace solutions. This is not a movement that offers a solution for the problem between Palestinians and Israelis. It separates, rightly to my mind, between the ongoing oppression of the Palestinians and the need to stop it before you reach a solution. Luis was talking about the American policy. The American paradigm for peace is, and unfortunately too many people accept it, that first you have a solution and then the oppression will end. And the Israelis like this idea because you never know when a solution will be, and as long as there is no solution, two things can happen. The Israelis would say, yes, we are oppressive, we are arresting people without trial, we are demolishing houses, we are expelling people, but this is temporary because it will all end once a solution arrives. So that's one thing that happens from this false paradigm of peace, that you first have a solution and then you protect the rights I was talking about. The second thing that happens, the Israelis understand that time is of an essence. So you continue establishing facts that would make any kind of a solution that they don't like impossible. So you build more Jewish settlements, you arrest more Palestinians, you disallow more Palestinians to come back, and you create a far more institutionalized apartheid system as a fait accompli, one that is not going to be negotiated, and there would be very little to negotiate once they finish. So the BDS movement's logic is, no, we cannot wait for the day of the solution. We are not waiting for another ceremony on the White House lawn where people would say, oh, the PLO and Israel have reached a solution. We cannot wait, because if we'll wait, there will be no Palestine and no Palestinians. So we ask the international community to disregard the peace efforts. They're not relevant to the suffering of the people. We ask human international solidarity against the most criminal aspects of Israeli policies. The military occupation and intervention in the West Bank, the siege on Gaza, the apartheid discrimination against the Palestinians in Israel, and the prevention of Palestinian refugees from returning. So what we ask is every community of academics, if we take the academic boycott part of the BDS, to show this kind of solidarity with the Palestinian people. It doesn't matter whether you support a two-state solution, a one-state solution, you like the PA, you don't like the PA. This is irrelevant. What is relevant, that you should tell the Israeli official institutions who want to have bilateral connection with the COLEGIO de Mexico, that want to say to you, you know, we are the only democracy in the Middle East. They want you to teach the history of Palestine as a history of Jewish return and Palestinian terrorism. We want you to teach the history of Palestine as history of colonialism, the history of Palestinian resistance as anti-colonialism, and to say to the Israelis, as you said to apartheid South Africa, you're not welcome in the COLEGIO de Mexico if you support the policies of the State of Israel. Thank you.
Shadi, as you know well, as the distinguished diplomatic person, Jared Kushner, with his enormous experience in conflict resolution, is going through the charade that Louis just explained to us. People of Gaza are living under a condition, subhuman condition, of a couple of hours of electricity in 24 hours, for which not only Israelis, primarily Israelis, but Hamas and Palestinian Authority are responsible. Namely, this conflict between who is going to rule Palestinians, this is my point about separating the fate of the nation from the state, are responsible. More specifically, about BDS, my interest, in addition to what Ilan said, is the role of BDS in transformation of Palestinian National Liberation Movement into an active civil rights movement, in which Palestinians in Israel, in occupied territory, in refugee camps, etc., all have a common interest. Now, the second point is, where is the site of this BDS activism? Right now, the most progressive sites that are actually responsive are Europe, not the United States, and worst of all is the Arab world. Despite the fact that in the Arab world, Palestinian question remains paramount, ideologically, politically, but in terms of active participation in BDS movement, forget it, is worse than the United States. In the United States, as you know, right now there are attempts of legislating, criminalizing BDS. Even calling for BDS is actively being criminalized, and even this liberal Zionists like Elizabeth Warren and the rest of them are realizing this is really a horror, so it's not going anywhere. Now, here the Israeli position is very paradoxical. On one hand, say, oh, who cares, BDS, it has no effect on us, is a marginal development. On the other hand, they're so petrified by BDS movement because it's non-violent. It completely contradicts everything that the Hasbara has been saying about Palestinians. Has nothing to do with guns, has nothing to do with anything. Is a peaceful, non-violent resistance of a civil society against occupation. That's all it, and Zionism is DNA, doesn't know how to deal with non-violence. They only want violence so they can kill and shoot and cry as they're shooting, as the expression in Arabic goes. So the BDS, as a result, needs to be more theorized, more articulated, site of the manifestations of BDS in Latin America, in Asia, in Africa, in Europe, in the Arab world. The hardest is actually the Arab world because of the power of these totalitarian regimes to frighten their population. This is the task. Now, to what degree this will be successful within the US context is a different story, but it is actually the international community, various, right here in Mexico, rest of Latin America. These are where the specific articulation of BDS in terms of issues domestic to Mexico, domestic to other parts in Latin America, or the way that the active solidarity with Palestinians becomes actually integral to the politics of resistance within these societies.
Te lo voy a decir en español para no dar demasiada vuelta a esto. El Colegio de México, como institución académica, se asemeja mucho a otras instituciones académicas del país. Aquí hay tendencias distintas de pensamiento, preferencias distintas a la hora de aproximarse al conflicto y acciones distintas. Entonces, yo creo que la clave, a partir de tu pregunta, BDS y qué hacer con eso en México, depende mucho de la sociedad civil en general, porque acá, bueno, pues el mismo fenómeno, estoy pensando yo, el UNAM tenemos exactamente la misma realidad como existe en otras muchas universidades. Entonces yo creo que lo que se trata es de seguir buscando espacios para la discusión y el intercambio de argumentos profundos y de cuestiones y de cuestionarse elementos que tomamos como verdades absolutas o que se nos repiten como verdades absolutas y que por ahí no va el resultado. Entonces, de ahí a que el Colegio de México se vaya a convertir en un espacio de vanguardia en la creación de BDS, tampoco lo veo. No lo veo como Trump. No creo que... por ahí creo que no va. En mi pronóstico limitado y bruto, si quieres, no veo mucho para eso, pero sí habría como... Lo más importante de todo, yo creo, cosas que estaban diciendo DABASHI y PAPPE, esto es un proceso, y es un proceso largo, y va a seguir siendo un proceso largo. Y a partir de la realidad del conflicto, y ahí sí, bueno, se me va a salir mucho la izquierda, de los que están, y voy a utilizar la palabra cubana, pero está en el diccionario, según Rubén me va a rectificar o no, de los que están jodidos en este mundo, si tú no miras hacia ahí, entonces nunca vas a acabar de poder tener una aproximación muchísimo más justa, que es lo que PAPPE estaba tratando, y DABASHI también, la necesidad de buscar justicia en una coyuntura que eso parece que son cosas del pasado, porque lo que estamos acostumbrados hoy en día es al reto tecnológico y a tratar de insertarnos dentro de eso. Pero el sufrimiento del otro, el sufrimiento del jodido, se va quedando cada vez más lejano de la aproximación y de la responsabilidad que supuestamente ese estado distorsionado y destrozado del que hablaba DABASHI sigue teniendo una preeminencia absoluta en todas partes de este mundo. Entonces, por eso vuelvo al inicio de lo que te dije, la necesidad del desarrollo de la sociedad civil en cada uno de nuestros espacios, con nuestras agendas, para interconexión con eso que muchos llaman la sociedad civil global. ¿Para qué? Para mi obsesión de siempre, para la construcción de puentes, para el entendimiento del otro y para solidarizarse con el dolor del otro. Punto, es lo que te podría decir.
If I may just add one thought regarding the demographic bomb, I warn us all, please avoid militarization of this metaphor. Demography is not a bomb. Demography has been a strategy of resistance, has been a strategy of hopefully triumph, and a strategy of hopefully peaceful and just resolution. Now, as soon as I say strategy, I have to correct myself. The question is a panel consisting of three bearded, almost bearded men. What is the point of pressure on demography? The point of pressure on demography are on mothers. In Tel Aviv airport, I have seen Jewish mothers with 5 toddlers, pregnant, walking through the security apparatus. The same pressure is on Palestinian mothers as they go. So the question of the health of mothers, public health of mothers, not just the recreative health, but public health of women, is paramount when we talk about demography. So we need to demilitarize these metaphors and think about the human cost of what does it mean to address the issue of demography.
Vamos a aceptar todavía 2 preguntas. Está el embajador y después Nitzan. Por acá también. El micrófono está por ahí atrás.
Es que iba a hacer una pregunta.
Sí, pero me habían levantado primero la mano ellos. Ahorita.
Buenos días. Good morning. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Yam Pape, Mr. Hamid DABASHI, my friend Ms. MESA, my friend Amauri, also Moses, for organizing this activity. It's very important activity to give information for our friends, Mexican friends here, about the situation in Palestine. I think that you achieved that very well. You gave a very good description about the situation in Palestine, and especially about the Israel strategy in the region, about the ideas that the people are discussing now, one-state solution, two-state solution, and this is one of the points that the people are discussing now, including the Palestinian society. They are discussing this idea. I think there is here one important point that we can add to the discussion. The danger of the Israel state. Or let us speak about the policy of the Israel government. Now, we are as Palestinians, we are struggling in order to achieve our rights. But in our struggle, there is a very important part, which is that we are struggling also in order to protect the human values, the international human value. And our friends here in Mexico should know that. Because when we are struggling against the concept of Israel, that the people who have the power, they have the right. Or the concept of Israel to introduce our national struggle as terrorism and the state terrorism as a defense. We are struggling also against these concepts that they are dangerous for the human, for all the community, for the international community. And the people should know that, because any other country will apply the same things against other country. I want to go to the point that the solidarity with our cause is also important for other communities, because they will impede that these manifestations go to their societies. And it is responsibility also to express solidarity with our cause. It is international responsibility, because the danger of the policy of Israeli government is danger for all communities. You spoke about a lot of aspects. I cannot comment about all points that you mentioned here, but the point is the point of power. When you speak about negotiations, it's a point of power. Israel doesn't want that any other part enter in the negotiations. Israel wants only bilateral negotiations and also accept USA only. They don't accept other parts. We ask Russia, China, many countries to form part of these negotiations. Also, we ask for international conference. You know that as well. But Israel doesn't accept this because Israel wants to apply the concept of power in the bilateral negotiations. And also, Israel, as you mentioned, wants to create new facts in that territory. We as Palestinians ask the international community to apply pressure at the government of Israel. Now, the civil solidarity is very important. Civil society, because it will conduce us to apply pressure to governments there, to apply a pressure at Israel government. If the countries don't sell weapons to Israel, Israel will stop. If they apply economical pressure, Israel will change its policy. Now, the policy of Israel, everybody should know that is a policy of expansion. Another point that I want to mention here to show the danger of Israel. Israel, or the Zionism movement, they are speaking about the big Israel. We don't know till where they will arrive in their border. Israel the only country that doesn't establish its borders in the United Nations. They are thinking in big Israel. And this is a danger for all countries. Because of that, the solidarity is responsibility of the international community. We have a good relations with Arab countries, with a lot of countries. We have 137 countries that recognize Palestine. We have problems, serious problem with the United States. But it's the only way that we have now. If the international community express solidarity, more solidarity, the situation will change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Since we have still three questions, I have the idea of listen to the question, very specific one, and then we will have a final run from your side. Yes, but was Nitzan first, you second, and Doris over there? Okay.
Thanks. Thanks very much for the discussion and the talk. I had
I asked the people, please, not to leave until the end.
I had two small questions. One mostly for HAMID DABASHI and perhaps ILAN PAPPE as well, and the other probably more broadly for the community. The first one, HAMID DABASHI mentioned that the Zionist propaganda machine cannot deal with nonviolence. I question that assumption, and I think that they have done so far, it's yet to see what comes out of the BDS issue, but they've done a very good job in many places framing it as anti-Semitism, which is the other good thing that they're good at. So they have a very well-scripted strategy for dealing with broad international nonviolence, expressions of solidarity with Palestinians. I think that's the great debate now about BDS. You mentioned the US. In Germany, too, people supporting BDS are discriminated against, excluded from academic jobs, and the like. So that is a battle that's still fought, and the legitimacy of the BDS movement is still up in the air in many areas. And I wondered what you, too, as people who have been involved, think about that and how it can be maintained and extended. And perhaps a little bit about the exchange between Shadi and Luis. You know, Ilan knows it very well. The Israeli academia is not precisely tolerant of dissent. And yet, I just come back from there and I've met with colleagues and friends there who are explicitly calling for BDS standing up for it. Some of them are tenured professors, but others are in very precarious teaching positions. They don't have any job safety, and nevertheless they do that with all the consequences. It doesn't seem to me exaggerated to ask from both academics and students in other parts of the world who have almost no price to pay for expressing solidarity with Palestinians to take a similar move as, first of all, because Palestinians are asking for it. But if you need to take some example of people who are doing that, despite personal risks, there are. So that's just something maybe more for our community to think about, and other academic communities in Latin America where that debate is still very nascent.
Second question here. You?
Thank you for an excellent discussion. I have a very straightforward question, but before I ask it, I wish to make it absolutely clear that I'm not trying to make a point, I'm simply asking out of intellectual curiosity. It's about the BDS movement. And as Professor DABASHI said, it's quite fortunate to speak after Professor PAPPE because one has a very good foundation from which to ask. It was mentioned that the three demands, the three objectives of the movement are the end of the occupation, equal rights for Palestinians within Israel, and the right of return. And my question is quite simple, is if all of these are accomplished simultaneously, if I'm not wrong, I think the BDS's own estimates for refugees is above 7 million. If all of those three things happen simultaneously, wouldn't that mean the end of Israel as a Jewish state? And I was wondering if I'm misreading this, or if I'm not, what is your opinion on this consequence? Thank you.
And the third and last question, please. After the event, you can approach the participants here for a closer talk. Sí, sí.
Okay. Bueno, una cuestión que siempre me estoy preguntando a medida que sigo trabajando el problema palestino-israelí es por qué hay esta tremenda contradicción que, por un lado, la causa palestina está ganando en el plan legal, jurídico, frente a la comunidad internacional, empezando por el reconocimiento mismo, por supuesto, de Palestina como Estado dentro de las Naciones Unidas. Inclusive hay un cambio en la sociedad civil de los europeos y muchos parlamentos le han pedido, desde hace 2 años más o menos para acá, le han pedido a sus respectivos gobiernos que reconozcan al Estado palestino de pleno derecho, y no se ha hecho. Entonces, y la contradicción es que por el otro lado, y ya aquí los distinguidos scholars lo han dicho, es la atroz situación que viven los palestinos día a día, tanto en Gaza como en Cisjordania. Esa es una pregunta. Y la otra pregunta sería, cuando se hablaba el profesor PAPPE sobre los elementos que nos relacionan con lo que sigue de Palestina a nivel local, a nivel regional y a nivel internacional. Entonces, en lo regional, yo estaba pensando en qué papel está jugando el Daesh, el autodenominado Estado Islámico, este grupo terrorista, qué papel está jugando en este momento en la causa palestina. Porque se ha escrito, aquí tengo un escrito de una scholar alemana que trabaja en Alemania, que ha escrito sobre el papel de Daesh, en donde dice que trata de convertir la causa, la naturaleza de la lucha palestina en un conflicto religioso, de unos fanáticos religiosos, y entonces los están acercando al mismo tiempo al mismo Daesh. Entonces es lo que aquí se decía que había que tener el cuidado de defender esta situación, de acercar al Estado, a la cuestión palestina, al mismo Daesh, que es un grupo terrorista que lo último que está haciendo es apoyar a la causa palestina, no tiene nada de Estado ni nada de islámico. y lo quiere convertir en un problema religioso y que no es un problema político territorial. Entonces, ¿qué papel juega en este momento?
Muchas gracias. Bueno, ahora los participantes van a responder a las preguntas y al final yo quiero decir unas palabras y les pido que se mantengan por acá.
Okay, thank you for very, very good questions and comments. Let me start something with what the ambassador said, and then I will move to Nitzan and the other two points. I think you raised an important issue about dehumanization, which I think we should all be clear about. Settler colonialist movements like Zionism do not only think of how to get more territory and to get rid of the indigenous native population, they also have, because they come themselves usually from a background of persecution and being victims themselves, they have to dehumanize the natives in order to be able to do to them what they did. Israel could not expel half of Palestine's population in 1948, could not have massacred thousands of Palestinians in 1948, and could not destroy half of Palestine's villages if you don't first dehumanize the Palestinians, including children, women, and old men, and decide that they are the enemy and therefore they can be treated the way they're treated. Generations of Israeli soldiers who are policing now the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and the Palestinians inside Israel continue this dehumanization because it is ingrained into the Israeli educational system, and therefore the international efforts are very superficial. They deal with where is the border, how much Israel will have as control, how much space would be Palestinian independence. This is all irrelevant issues to the main problem, which is the dehumanization of the Palestinians within a project that wants to de-Arabize Palestine and the Palestinians. And therefore, we should be ready. We should be ready. People who live there and people who are struggling on our behalf, we should be ready for a long struggle because we have to change our language, we have to change our perceptions. We will also have to change our political structures because they are inadept. They don't adapt well. This is for Shadi. They don't even, it's also the Palestinian representation in the Knesset is a problem. We need to, but this will take time, and we cannot destroy something before we have something new, because that creates a very dangerous chaos. We have to, but we have a lot of work to do. Nitzan, for your question, it is true that Israel is using anti-Semitism as the main weapon against BDS. I may take an issue with you that it's working for them. I think one cannot generalize here. It works well in Germany for obvious historical reasons. It doesn't work at all in Britain, I can tell you. It works even less in Spain and surprisingly even Italy. France is sort of in between Germany and Britain. I have a feeling that just for demographic reasons, if you go to the younger generation after what I call the youthquake we had in 2008, after that youthquake, if you go to the younger generation, even if Jewish younger generation, and in particular Jewish generation, and you will claim that supporting the Palestinian rights is anti-Semitism, it doesn't hold water as much as it does for our generation. People who lived through the Holocaust, people who still have memories from, or feel ashamed of what happened, and so on. Yes, I agree. This can stifle the debate. It can paralyze them. But for the younger generation, even of Germans, and I've been working in Germany a lot, even for the younger generation, it doesn't work. This is why the Israelis and their support are using all their ammunition, legislation, criminalization, but criminalization through legislation, as I told my American colleagues, is not from God. Fight against it. I mean, we're not reporters. We're activists. If someone legislates my work as criminal work, I will take the best lawyer to challenge him. I will not sit at home and say, oh my God, I cannot do any more BDS action because there's a senator who wants to criminalize BDS. Okay, let them criminalize, let them take to court. Let's have a constitutional discussion in America about the right for BDS. This would be such a great success for the BDS movement. We can't ask for anything more. I keep telling my friends in the movement, if they legislate against you, it means you've done something. If they don't legislate against you, you haven't done anything. And I like your second point, I agree. Israelis, as someone who really paid a price for supporting BDS, I can tell you this is a very low price to pay compared to what other people are paying. And like you, I'm surprised that our Israeli colleagues who are not doing much more, but it is growing, as you say, and it's a very optimistic scenario in many ways. I think that the BDS is creating a kind of descending movement, a dissident movement within the Israeli academia. Contrary to what Noam Chomsky says, it doesn't entrench the Israelis further. In fact, it opens up new avenues. That I wrote 2 books with him, and he's not convinced. I'm not going to write a third one. The point about the Jewish state, does it not annul the Jewish state if all the 3 rights would be implemented simultaneously? Now, you know, the idea of a Jewish state is not a neutral objective term. A Jewish state means many things to many people. And what really matters is what is the definition of a Jewish state given by those with power. And those who have the monopoly on power define a Jewish state as a racist, ethnic state which aims at continuing the settler colonial project of dispossessing the Palestinians from Palestine. If you will tell me that the implementation of these 3 rights will bring an end to this project, I may become religious and say thank you, God, for doing that. Because this is a humanist project to dismantle an inhuman project. If you are thinking in terms of, oh my God, the implementation of these 3 rights would mean the end of Jews in Palestine, another Holocaust, I don't know, a very bloody kind of scenario, then of course we should not want the implementation of these rights to lead to that. But I think the basic impulse of the BDS movement is to create a political system, entity, that respects human rights and civil rights for all, whether they are Jews, whether they are Muslims, whether they are Christians, whether they are settlers of the 3rd generation like myself, or they are natives who've been there for centuries, whether they are men or women. This is the whole idea. So we are replacing, we shouldn't use the language of catastrophe and scaremongering because it stifles the debate that we need to have. Are the people who live between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean entitled to live in a political system that respects their individual rights, collective rights, as it is respected, or at least it should be respected, everywhere else in the world? So this is what the BDS movement is about. To perpetuate Israel as a Jewish state is to perpetuate the suffering of the Palestinians, is to contribute to the continued violence in the Middle East, and to contribute to instability in the world. So these are very important projects. Finally, the question the lady has asked about Daesh, yeah, the Daesh question. Now, it's very clear to me that political Islam, as we call it, and I think Hamid would have more to say about it. He's more knowledgeable about it than I am. But to my understanding, political Islam is a very complex phenomenon. It starts with the individual who believes that modernity and secularism has betrayed him or her, and they're looking for a panacea, they're looking for a reward in a life which economically and socially is really not very promising, without a future. And they, if you want, return to religion because religion gives something that the modern life and modernization failed to give. That's one side of the spectrum. The other side of the spectrum is a very cynical manipulation of the idea of religion in order to push forward political goals of tyranny, dictatorship, and unwillingness to share power with anyone else. So this is a huge human spectrum. Now, this is also a spectrum of human activity and belief that is not only internally, it's not only an internal engagement. There's a lot of cynical intervention from the outside. Without American intervention, there would not have been Al-Qaeda. Without American intervention in Iraq, there would not have been ISIS or Daesh. Israel loves the phenomenon of the Islamic State. It really helps it to divert public attention from the Palestine question. It contributes to a negative image of whatever is defined as Muslim or Islam. It correlates the so-called war on terror with the Palestinian liberation struggle. So not surprisingly, you don't have to be a believer in conspiracy theories to understand that Israel and the United States have a lot to gain from the phenomenon of Al-Qaeda and Daesh, not to mention the military industry that needs such monsters to justify the reproduction of arms and the development of lethal weapons. I think for us as activists, and with this I will end, for us as activists, we should only demand one thing to begin with. And we don't get it. We don't get it from the mainstream media, we don't get it from the mainstream academia, we definitely don't get it from the political elites. The only thing we ask is to use the same moral yardstick for examining violations of human rights and civil rights. Whether these are Syrians who do it to other Syrians, whether it's Israelis doing it to Palestinians, whether it is Palestinians doing it to other Palestinians, we want the same yardstick. The one reason nobody in the West can have a reasonable conversation with anyone in the Middle East about either the Islamic State or the situation in Syria is the exceptionalism that Israel receives in the last 70 years. Israeli human rights violations are never compared to the violations of human rights by Arab regimes or by resistance movements to Arab regimes. We need a universal conversations about violation of human rights, and this will also diminish the power or the attractiveness, I think, of movements like the Islamic States, and it will bring a whole different perception of what is a better human life, what is welfare and well-being in the future Middle East, as well as in the future Palestine. So we should insist that whoever violates human rights and civil rights is our enemy. And we should never forget that the people who have done it most in the last 100 years are the Zionists and not the people of the Arab world. Thank you.
This is a magnificent conversation, and I don't want to abuse this amazing environment. I know it's getting late. You want to go have your tacos and so forth. I could easily just sign my name under everything that Ilan said and move on. But both out of respect for the audience and also just adding a couple of more minor points, I'll say a few things. I try to keep it limited. My first point is to the Honorable Mr. Ambassador of Palestinian State. I, for one, as somebody who, from the age of 5, I have been committed to the Palestinian cause, I'm elated whenever I'm in a country that Palestine has an official representation. However, as a representative of Palestinian Authority, as a representative of Mahmoud Abbas, sir, you should know your first responsibility is to Palestinian people, not negotiation with Netanyahu and Trump. There is a report that Trump yelled at Mahmoud Abbas in a private gathering. Yelling at Mahmoud Abbas at the moment that Mahmoud Abbas has a claim to representing Palestinian people is yelling at Palestinian people.
Not God Almighty has the right to yell at Palestinian people after 100 years of suffering. It is imperative for Palestinian Authority to know their chief responsibility right now as Palestinians are suffering in Gaza is to Palestinian people, not rivalry with Hamas and Jabhat Sha'biyya and so these are all secondary. Now, the second point apropos success of our colleague is the success of the Hasbara, the Israeli propaganda about BDS and anti-Semitism. Again, I echo Ilan's. Germans have every right, have every reason to be wary of anti-Semitism. So do the French. Monsieur Macron recently equated criticism of Zionism with anti-Semitism. He has to know what the French did in Africa is what Zionism is doing in Palestine. So he's not in a moral authority to pontificate about criticism of Zionism being equal to anti-Semitism. Be that as it may, anti-Semitism is not a light charge, it's not an easy charge to be leveled against anybody. I am an example of being called an anti-Semite by virtue of my support. But the more this obscenity of this charge against a person like me, the more it has made me successful, not in general, particularly with my Jewish colleague and Jewish students, for generations. In fact, I'm slightly taking issue with Ilan, this infantilization, the younger Jews. He doesn't look particularly young himself, you know. It is, yes, there is a significant generational issue, but it is not that before this generation all Jews were pro-Zionist and were active. There is a sustained crescendo of reclaiming the Jewish prophetic voice. Now, with all my differences with Chomsky these days, the fact is that in the harshest, darkest ages of demonization of the Palestinian cause, he was at the forefront of defending the Palestinian cause. So, particularly in this time, that you have devout anti-Semite Zionists in the White House, people like Steve Bannon, people like Gorka, people like, you know, these are not nominal anti-Semites. They have a sustained record of anti-Semitism. They had the the Star of David of their campaign against Hillary Clinton. It's not that what I'm saying. Gorka has a picture with Nazi insignia. These are all Zionist anti-Semites. So they have much larger paradox in their own positions when people in the streets of Charlottesville are yelling the most obscenest form of anti-Semitism, and Netanyahu doesn't utter a word. And Trump is defending them. That, oh, there are many sides on this issue. When a young college student, Jewish young college student, is supporting BDS, he's called a self-hating Jew. Imagine the obscenity of this. So it has a limit to what degree it can be leveled against people, and it just exhausts itself. And after that, truth emerges, and truth is not anti-Semitism. You don't have anything against Jews just for being Jews. It's a legitimate criticism of Zionism. And as I always say, the only people who are scared of being called anti-Semites are anti-Semites. If you're not anti-Semites, you don't care. You move on. Not all Jews are Zionists, not all Zionists are Jews. There are plenty Muslim Zionists, Christian Zionists, etc. Now, apropos the question of Jewish state, again, Ilan said it, but for somebody like me with a history of sustained criticism of Islamic Republic, I can't walk into Iran. Ilan can go to Israel, I can't go to Iran because I'm critical of Islamic Republic. I don't believe in Islamic Republic. With the same token, for every sentence that I have said against the idea of a Jewish state, I have said 10 times harsher against Islamic Republic. I have books against Islamic Republic, only articles criticizing Zionism. With the same logic, I'm against Christian imperialism. When you read Steve Bannon, he's a horrid crusader going back to the time of Crusades, both in his anti-Semitism and in his Islamophobia. He's in the White House until recently. And he has just been unleashed, you know, to the larger. So the fate of 6 million, 7 million human beings who call themselves Israelis in Israel, to me, is far more important than an ideological commitment to a Jewish state. I want all of them live in peace, harmony, and mutual respect. Now, again, just to shift on the Islamization of the Palestinian cause, Daesh, historically, Daesh has appeared in bright daylight of history, is the result of de-Baathification of Iraq in the aftermath of illegal, immoral invasion and occupation of Iraq on false, flawed, and mischievous, and all of the charge of weapons of mass destruction, etc., by United States and his allies. Number one. Number two, the criminal atrocities of Bashar al-Assad. United States, Bashar al-Assad, these are the father and mother, whatever, if you want to use, I hate to use this beautiful metaphor of mother and father, of Daesh. Simple as that. Peaceful demonstration of Syrians for their legitimate rights was bloodied first by Bashar al-Assad. Yes, then Iranians came, yes, then Saudis came, and the Qataris and all of that. I mean, that's historicized. This is the fertile ground of the rise of Daesh. Has nothing to do with the Palestinian cause. Fortunately, not all Palestinians are Muslims. There are plenty Christian Palestinians. There are plenty Jewish Palestinians. And Palestine is, by virtue of 100 years of resistance, is a revolutionary cosmopolitan condition. No religion. I'm as much opposed to Islamic Republic of Palestine as I am to the Jewish state of Israel. God forbid if we have if Christian Palestinians said, oh, we want to create the second coming, or Muslims wanted to have an Islamic Republic of Palestine. No, we have to actively begin to think, yes, there are Muslim Palestinians who have suffered as much as Christian Palestinians, as much as Jewish Palestinians. The obscenity of the fact of Jewish Palestinians creating this obscene colonial term, Israeli Arabs. What the hell is that supposed to mean? The dimensions of that racism, of that very term, Israeli Arabs, just because you're occupied, you can't defend yourself. The moral of the story is, there is a reason why the Palestinian cause is so resonant with other liberation causes. Because it is so rich and so diversified, and so right and so truthful, that hundreds of years of Zionist propaganda has not been able to tarnish it. Sorry for taking too long.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much to the three participants in this roundtable. Thank you very much to the audience. And now I will ask for your permission to switch from English into Spanish, not specifically Spanish, but to Havana dialect, because I need to say some things to this guy over here on my right. Entonces voy a cambiar el idioma. Y hablaba al principio de la sesión de privilegio. Hablaba del privilegio de tener a los tres ponentes hoy, del privilegio de tener el salón lleno, pero ese no era el momento de hablar de otros privilegios. Y uno de esos privilegios importantes es pues, estar aquí, al lado de Luis, en este día. Yo no pensaba decir que era el cumpleaños, él mismo lo dijo antes, eso iba un poquito más tarde. No solo por el cumpleaños de Luis, sino también por el hecho de ser yo el que tengo el micrófono, de estar ahora por un tiempito en la dirección del CEA y poder justamente un día como hoy, pues hablar unas cuantas cosas acá. Yo sé que él, mira como ya la cara que tiene, se pone bravo, no le gusta, se pone serio, de que le digan las cosas que hay que decirle, porque hay que decírselas. Y yo sé que la mayoría de la gente que está aquí, habrán algunos que no lo conocen, pero hay muchos que sí lo conocen, hay muchos que lo quieren un montón, y son de esas cosas que hay que hacer, aunque pongas esa cara. El profesor DABASHI el lunes estaba hablando de que Luis era una mezcla entre Fidel Castro, el Che Guevara y con un Islamic approach. El primer ejemplo no sé para Luis cómo le funcione, pero sí hay una realidad detrás de eso. Y para mí realmente es un gustazo y qué bueno que se hizo esa actividad y qué bueno que además conspiraron mucha gente en... Uy, siguen conspirando. Todo esto fue una gran conspiración, empezando por los dos ponentes, PAPPE y DABASHI, porque el día no es casual. Es decir, la selección del día pues también es parte de la maquinaria macabra de Musa. Por lo tanto, ni modo hacer. ¿Cómo dicen? ¿Ya te jodiste?
Español clásico.
Así es. Sí es clave para nosotros hablar de esto hoy. Para nosotros hablo ahora en nombre también del SEA, no en el mío particular como persona. Porque privilegios van en muchos sentidos. Es decir, Luis sabe perfectamente bien, porque venimos de la misma isla, pues todo el trayecto en llegar y estar aquí el día de hoy. Es un privilegio para nosotros formar parte de esta institución. Pero asimismo, como digo que es un privilegio para nosotros formar parte de esta institución, también es importante decir que es para esta institución un privilegio tenerte a ti como colega, tenerte a ti como parte del centro. Así es. Se adelantó el pastel. Muchachos bonitos, se las cantamos aquí. Despierta, despierta. Mira, se apagó. No importa. Muchas felicidades a Luis. Retomo lo que dijo DABASHI, porque una de las cosas, hay muchas para admirar a Luis, muchísimas, como colega, como persona, como hermano, porque él es mi hermano, adoptado, pero es mi hermano. Pero una de esas importantísimas que tiene mucho que ver con lo que decía DABASHI es el espíritu de lucha, y no solo de lucha revolucionario, no, sino el espíritu de lucha como ser humano. El seguir echando para adelante como colega, el ser ejemplo como colega, como profesor, como padre, como amigo, y por lo tanto sigue echando para adelante, sigue luchando, porque aquí todo el mundo te necesita, tus hijos te necesitan, y tú también, para ti es importante seguir luchando hacia ti. Gracias. Sé que hay gente que quiere hablar, aprovechen, no sé si nos van a votar de aquí, pero aprovechen porque hay gente de hecho que vino específicamente para decir cosas. Acá es uno.
Tú también te prestas para esto.
Sí. David.
Gracias por la oportunidad de dirigir unas palabras, de saludar a Luis. Nunca llegó como cubano, empezó a nosotros. Cubano con sentido de la revolución cubana, padre de las letras intelectuales islámicas de la isla. Y no llegaba. Y cuando llegó al principio del segundo semestre, que era en francés, en árabe y en inglés, Luis aportó además el tono cubano y nos permitió que ninguno entendiéramos nada de lo que estaba pasando. Ha sido un privilegio tu amistad, Luis. Creo que mucho de lo que se ve aquí, de lo que se ha expuesto, refleja justamente tu trayectoria intelectual, tu compromiso, y creo que si algo además de gozar de tu amistad, algo he apreciado siempre en ti, incluso desde el principio cuando no era precisamente muy respetuoso contigo, un poco bullying contigo, he de reconocerlo, junto con otros compañeros, a quienes nos impactaba mucho tu compromiso marxista-leninista con tratar de entender a Ibn Khaldun, ¿no? Es la constancia, el compromiso y la pasión que le pones a las cosas, incluyendo tu lucha de vida. Y creo que es el principal ejemplo y desde lo que más carecemos, tanto en la vida pública como en la vida académica. La constancia, la dedicación, la congruencia con los compromisos, y conociendo tu trayectoria, sabiendo todo lo que te has comprometido y luchado por lo que has creído, y que trataste de creer mucho más tiempo de lo que todos los demás te decíamos que debías de dejar de creer, pero seguías empeñado, es parte de tu congruencia. Y agradezco mucho a Mauri la invitación y la oportunidad de dirigir esas palabras, solo para expresar algo que ustedes conocen en la trayectoria de Luis, pero reiterar que como lo conozco desde chiquito, siempre ha sido el mismo, muy grande.
Muchas gracias a David, quien está solo unos poquitos días. David no solo fue compañero de generación de Luis, sino es el actual embajador de México en Hungría y venía unos pocos días y, bueno, por supuesto, enseguida tuvo toda la disposición de venir aquí a acompañar a Luis hoy.